see, there's some nonsense up on the board. However, we're going to break it down into brass tacks over. If you're new to this station or this channel, this YouTubiness, subscribe and like if you want. Maybe watch a couple minutes, see if you dig me, my personality, yada yada. And then the way that I describe things. What this channel is for me is I teach music a couple days a week here in Hilo, Hawaii. A lot of my students have further questions than I'm able to get to in 30 minutes. So making these videos, one, helps me explain things. Two, helps other people understand the basics of music theory, whether it's definitions, vocabulary for your vocabulary tool bag, or it's just basic concepts. So today, the basic concepts we're going to do is we're going to talk about the family tree of music, which means when we have a big old circle up here, what this does is it represents a totality of notes. There are multiple types of these, like this one, a breve, double breve. They last for different amounts of time, but the most common one that we see, pun intended, is in common time. Common time is referred to as 4/4, because when we're counting rhythm, we want to have a stable beat unto which other things fit into. Music notation uses the beat or the pulse, called tempo, and puts it along with pitches in notation on the clef, and then allows us to do different types of note structures based off of how those pitches sound together. That's the crux of this biscuit. Hey Jeff! I saw you the other day commented. I hope these videos are fun, digging it. If you have anything to add, please put it in the comment section. I'd love to chit chat about stuff. But I need to stay task oriented. In 4/4, the reason why we have this is I feel it kind of being this way. If we had 4 dots out in space and we drew a circle in between them, this amount of space would be a quarter. This amount of space, another quarter. See where I'm going with this? When we utilize these rotations, the notes that are in between fall out to be this note. So if you already don't know what a quarter note is, it is worth 1 beat. So every time we go around this circle, if we were counting a whole tone in 4/4, we would have It's the totality of the whole thing. When we cut it into half, we now have a note called a half note. In 4/4, what we're striving for is to be able to have complete measures, meaning when we have a staff, doesn't matter what that staff is. If you've never heard of this term, this is called a stave or a staff. It is a grouping of 5 lines unto which notation lives. When we have a staff like there, it's nothing. It's just a blank template. By taking this clef, there is the alto clef. We've got the bass clef. We got the bass clef. We've got the treble clef. Actually, there's a multitude. I think there's like 9 or 11 clefs. Honestly, in the Western ear, what we boiled everything down to in music notation basically fits into just the treble clef and then the bass clef. If you have an instrument which is outside of a concert pitch, which means all these instruments don't need to be tuned or modulated to a different key, they all reside in the key of concert C. We use the note A, 440, boom, to tune in most orchestral sounds, unless you're tuned to a different note in the band or a project or an orchestra or an ensemble that you're doing. Oh, right on. How is that? Is the sound better? Also, I'm going to play the piano really quick. Tell me if it's too loud. Is that too loud on the piano? Give me a thumbs up if the sound sounds better. Thank you for that, Jeff. As you know, I'm technologically a doop-de-doo. All right, so this is called the staff, S-T-A-F-F. It's also called a stave across the pond. A lot of these things that I talk about, I'm going to try and tell you all the different things. Like, if we had this quarter note, we also call this quarter note a minim. In Britain. It's just a different word. So long story short, a breve, a whole note, a half note, being able to go through all these different words, it makes sense to learn it in both, but I don't want to confuse anybody, so I'm just going to go with what happens here in the States, basically. The staff here, when we put a bar on the end, it signifies that we have now turned this single staff into something called a measure. As I aforementioned, on the measure, that's where we're going to be putting the notation. So, the clefs that we just talked about, the two most common that we use represent the higher end of the spectrum, the treble. We call the treble clef the G clef. When we get rid of the top half, you can see how the lower case of this represents a lowercase g, meaning that the line that it presides on is the G. G is here, which must mean that B is the middle line, D is the second line from the top. GBD makes a triad. When we put notes in notation that are stacked above each other, like so, we form them as being something called a triad. Now, I don't want to get too far into this because this is covered in another video called chord construction. Tertiarily, we have a major third and a minor third. They're just distances between 7 notes in a family. Cool, thank you very much. So, having said that, when we have these notes and we put them on, I'm just making this huge so we can see it. When we put them on a line, we have a time signature generally. If you do not see a time signature, then it's in common time, 4/4, meaning there are 4 beats per measure, and then the quarter note gets the beat because there are 4 quarter notes in that whole note. When we write something on here, when we have a note, we put the note on the line or on the space. On the line, on the space, on the line, so forth, so on. When we do a grouping of 7 notes, those are the notes of a scale. This particular scale is G major or E minor. Starting on the G note, G, A, B, C, D, E, and then the top line of the treble clef is an F. I don't need to mark this note as a sharp or a flat, or for that matter, a double sharp or a double flat, because it's in the key signature. Again, key signatures are for another video that's already out on this channel. It tells you how to, hey Donna, how you doing? It's good to see you. Thank you for being a part of the quiz series. Those are, I look forward to seeing your answer every day. So going through here, the notation of the key signature is in a different series that I've done on here. It's also in the live. What we're talking about today is how to actually place these notes and count out the rhythms and how to see the family of music. So having said that, one last thing I want to do just so you see it. When you've got a note, the stem goes up when it's below the B, middle of it. The B is special. You can put a line on either side. In fact, you can put this exactly how you see it. As soon as you go past that B line, you're going to want to put your stem on the other side. There's a reason for this, and we'll get into it. Single note melodies, you'll see these in different ways, but consistently, when you're doing something called SATB, it refers to part writing. Most choral unions use this. However, actually I kind of drew that wrong. Soprano and alto would be on the treble clef, and then when you connect this using a double line to another staff down here, that's when we mark this one as being the bass clef. That's where the higher baritone and tenor reside, and then the bass. So that's how we do part writing. That's how you kind of write out sheet music and staff. And what I want to do is give you new music gurus the ability to see notes and not get overwhelmed by them. There's a simple way of doing it and a great way to practice the practice of practicing, which means once you learn the way that you can practice, it just becomes exponentially easier to read music like this. So, first thing I want to do, again, I'm going to draw out this whole note. Now, if we were in a measure of 6/4, 4/4 was there are 4 beats per measure and the quarter note gives the beat. If we were going to say something like, how about 6/8? 6/8 means that we have 6 beats per measure and then the 8th notes get the beat. In a measure that is only so long, if you have a whole note, it's for the whole measure. So in 4/4, it'd be worth 4. In 6/8, it'd be worth 6. The concept behind this is you learn how to count in different meters, but you put the pulse of the rhythm underneath. Hence, when we do something like this, we're gonna 1, 2, 3, 4. If I put a beat on the 1 and the 3, I would be feeling almost something called 2-4, right? If I just did every beat, we'd have 4-4. I also can subdivide that. So if we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're keeping the constant quarter note over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, whilst keeping 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can see how different rhythms or polyrhythms are put on top of a tempo. This is talking about the downbeat. When we take this whole note, which is worth in common time 4 beats, and we cut it in half, we now have 2 separate halves. And anybody who loves fractions, half plus a half equals a whole. Now what these look like, when we do our family tree, we still have the note head, which is open, and then we put a stem off to the side. These 2 notes represent 2 beats apiece. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hence, when you're counting out half notes, sometimes you might want to just visualize dots at noon and a dot at 6. Meaning 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's a great way to visualize music moving around. The next 2 notes, as you can see with these subdivisions, we're going down in 2. I'm going to drop down the same style of note right here. However, we are now going to fill in the note head. When we fill in the note head, we can clearly see that this note now is different from this note. Half notes are worth 2 beats. When we divide those 2 beats into equal parts, we get quarters or minimums. So when we count these, this has 4 beats supposedly, 1, 2, 3, 4. Our half notes, 1, 2, 1, 2. Our quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is how we count them. So if we went over to here, we would find ourselves looking at notes and saying, oh, they have values. When going from left to right, we read those values as having a space that they fill, and then having to complete that space by altering the downbeat. Meaning, when we again cut this into equal parts, we now have something that was this, turned into this, and now is this. Well, if we divide this again, we would have not 4 parts, but 8 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So a great way to visualize the next note, 8th notes, is by having the same quarter, and then we put a flag or a quaver. Again, that's what they call it in Britain. The flag over here results in being a quaver. Now, here is something super interesting that a lot of my students ask me. They just don't understand the fact of why an 8th note can be written with a little flag, or you can just get rid of one of the other flags and connect the beams. So a lot of the times what you'll see is 8th notes are written as such, which that's a perfect way to see it, but here's the explanation of why. When we're singing or playing an instrument and we're playing notes within rhythm, and let's say there are 12 beats per measure, and the 8th note gets the beat, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now that's a little wordy, so let's divide that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When we do this, it sets a natural pulse to have an accent on the 1. And notice, the notes that I'm clapping, they're 8th notes. Here's my 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and it's just the division in 6 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A good thing if you're practicing rhythm is to switch it. So if you're doing your dominant hand, keeping the 8th notes, switch. So the other hand, your non-dominant hand, the weak hand, also has the opportunity to develop the motion of 8th notes, 16th, 32nd, 64th. So Here we are. It's St. Alfonso's pancake breakfast. We're going to take these eighth notes and, again, take each one of these pie slices and then divide them again. And what do we get? We get 16ths. So you can see where we're going with this. Each time we go up by adding its sum, we get different notes. Now here's where I'm going to branch off of my family tree and just call it like this. When we're counting quarter notes, we are counting the downbeat. When we are counting eighth notes, it has the downbeat of 1, 2, 3, and 4, but we now have added the upbeat. The upbeat or the backbeat or the way that you're going to fill these notes is that you're putting the accent on different notes in a measure which give a different feeling. So even though you might have something like an eighth note, if you're tying together another note like a quarter, you might have eighth note quarter. Now, that feels like a note called a triplet or a tuplet. Tuplets are grouping of 3 notes. So we would take eighth notes like this, bar them together, and put a note as such. Cool, that's a tuplet. You might even see it like this, where it has a little bar showing you, that's a tuplet. It has a little 3 over the top. It should feel like, because 1 and a. 1 and a. Here's where it gets really interesting. The way that we count every other note, or every other notation device after eighth notes, is as we would count the next note, 16th notes. 16th notes, they take the eighth note idea, and because this is so long, I don't want to write all these out, but all these, there's a 16th here. Actually, I will write them out. And rather than having one bar, I just won't write it in the note heads. I'm going to do freehand. Each one of these, it has 2 bars now. So if I were to count this out, the way that I count it out is 1, E, and Now, what I want to do is show you how that actually looks. Here, I need one more. Here's what the whole family kind of sounds like. And let me write this out. 1, E, and As you can notice, this is my second right here, right? So we would have 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and Each one of these gets divided out for 30-second notes like this. 16th notes would only be these. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and It covers all the spaces here. So what I like to do is try to use these and show how they work together. And since we were talking about what eighth notes are and what eighth notes aren't, the reason why we sometimes have eighth notes that have this and then they go to another note is because sometimes we tie these to make longer notes. So a half of a beat plus a beat makes a beat and a half. Well, this marking that you see is the same as this. And you might be saying, WAGO, what are you doing? You just drawing? Nay, say I. This is an eighth note attached legato, or has a tie. If it went to a different note, let's say these are both the C note. Doot, doot, middle C. It goes to the same note right here. That means you are tying them together. If the note we had was not the same note, but it was above the note or below the note, this would be considered a slur. The 2 different types of legato markings are a tie or a slur. This notation is the same as this notation, which leads us to another concept. Basic notation can add and subtract notes by using rests and dots. I know, it's a lot, but the idea is once you learn some key principles about where to read this, sheet music will make a lot more sense. It gives you a little bit more feeling, that with dynamic markings, that with staccato and legato markings. And just since we're on the same page, the opposite of legato which is a slur or a tie, is called staccato. It's represented by a dot. Staccato. So, if we have a note that's on our staff, let's say it's this one, and we have that, and then above, there's a dot right above it, that means to play the note very, very detached. Meaning, if we're playing something along the lines that has like a... These are long and flowing chords. But if we have staccato, we might have like a... Hear how those eighth notes I'm playing over the top are very short and detached? I could hold that note out for the full extreme. Da, 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 da. But if I shortly detach them, da, 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 it gives a different feeling. So, can you have a whole note in 4/4 with a dot? Absolutely. 4 beats plus half of the value. Well, what's half of 4? 4 divided by 2 is 2. So, a dotted whole note is worth 6 beats. Now here's where it gets funny. In a measure of 4/4, that's an incomplete measure. You cannot have 6 beats when there's only supposed to be 4 beats. So, in 6/4, perfect. See where we're going with this? One of the other notes we had after we divide that into halves, we have a half note. Well, a dotted half note takes the value of a half note, which is 2, and it adds half of it. Well, half of 2 is 1. So a dotted half note equals 3 beats. The way that you would see this in a measure of 4/4 would look like this. 4/4, here's our beginning bar. We would have a note in the notation here. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. And then we would have something along the lines of, let's say a B note. B. We're going to have a dotted half note. That is worth 3 beats. And then let's say we have a G. That is a long line. The way we count this is we know that this is worth 2 and then 3. So this is 1, 2, 3, and then 4. When we read this, we know that there aren't any beats here, and there's no reason to put a rest or anything because there's no lack of sound. The sound is carrying through. Actually, let me hit the note. Let's be real here. I wish I had perfect pitch. I don't. So. If we did not have a dotted half note and we just had this would be an incomplete measure because we're not filling the 4 beats per measure, and the quarter notes is not receiving all those beats, isn't it? Or not. They are not receiving all the beats. So here brings us to another wonderful idea, the aforementioned word rest. For each note, there is also an equal but not opposite rest. The ones that you will most commonly see will be this one, which has it looks almost like a big old dark bar and then what you would consider a square or a rectangle or box underneath it. I think it looks like a little magician's hat. So that's kind of what I think of. Here, if I was a magician and I pulled a rabbit out of the hat, I'd have the whole rabbit. Here's where it gets weird. When you turn it upside down and put it right here, I kind of view it as if you have half a rabbit. The other way to think about it is a half note has 2 beats. If you turn it upside down, it drops out 2 of the beats. That's kind of how I remembered it in the beginning. There are multiple different ways to remember it, but this one way helps me. When we have a top hat, it's 2 beats. When we have a hat or you just call it the whole rest. The whole rest is worth the same as the whole note. When you turn it upside down, it drops out 2 beats. That's kind of the way I think about it. That's worth the half note. When we go here to the next one, our next, and here we can see where we have 1, 2, 3, 4. It would sound like this. Ha, 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 ha. Absolutely. So that's a measure of 4/4 we followed through while using a rest. When we go to our quarter note, as you remember, there are 4 of them in a whole note. So our quarter note looks like this. Now, I'm not the best drawer, but a lot of them look like that. Kind of like a 3-ish. Some of the ones you have will just do something like this. Yeah, not a fan of that either. The feeling is something like that. In each music book I've seen, it's a little different. So I've just started drawing them like that. It serves the purpose. When I see that, write that, do that, feel that, that is what my rest looks like. So that's a quarter note rest. The next note we have after the quarter note, if you remember correctly, has the quaver or the flag there. Sound is up. Oh, great. How you doing, Lito? Welcome. The 8th note. No. Actually, I don't feel like spelling anymore. 8th. After that, we have 16th. I'm only going to go to 64th notes, but I want you to see why these work. 64th. Shucks, we could go 128th notes if we wanted. After our 8th note, we have 2 flags. After our 2 flag notes of our 16th, we have 3 flags. That's our 32nd. The one thing you must remember for any note after a quarter, they start adding flags depending on how far these notes go. So if you see some crazy notes and they look like this, and it has 4 bars, this is what we call a 64th note. Remember, all of the note heads are filled in, and the 4 bars are representative of the same. So when we have rests, the rests do the same thing. Our 8th notes have a single dot representing the 8th, and they go up. That's our flag, and then down for our stem. We have inverted this concept and put it here. Our 16th notes do the same thing, but then add a secondary system here. When we put our dot and flag system, this is representing to me that we have a rest. And then lastly here, each one of these collectively getting a little shorter towards it goes in towards the staff. So cool, huh? So these are our rests. I'd like to take us over to the other side of the board. Hopefully that other stuff won't be annoying there. This top line we have here as the example number 1. It is in 4/4. We're going to start off super simple here and talk about the quarters. Whenever I talk about the notes, what I like to do with new time students, I don't have any of my other colors. Oh well, it's all black today. We count out the rhythms first. Now, the idea about practicing the practice of practice. When you grab a book and you're looking at notes and notation, no matter if that book is a drum book, maybe I'll give a quick shout out. I've used this book for like 1.5 years now. Ryan Bloom put this one out. The thing that interests me about this one, the Rudimentaria, is that it does some history about how drum corps started and where these other beats came from. There's beats in here that I've never heard about before that aren't part of our standard 40 rudiments, but they're wonderful rudiments to get used to. So, having said that, 40 rudiments in drumming are a particular type of note pattern recognition unto which you can start putting those into music. So, really quickly, there's one of my favorites called a paradiddle. If you put a paradiddle in music, you actually get a really kind of cool system of notes that fall. So when we're reading out of any book, this one's called the Wabash Cannonball. This is in the key of G because it has 1 sharp, and then it has a time signature of 4/4. Meaning, when I count these notes, the first thing I do is I look at that measure and I say, is that a complete measure? Since it's 4/4 and there's an 8th note, I know how I count the 8th notes is 1 and. 1 and. So are there enough beats in that first measure? No, we're missing 3 other beats, meaning it's an incomplete measure. 9 times out of 10, the notes that you are missing from the first measure will be found in the last measure. And notice what that note is. It's that dotted half note. Dotted half note is worth 3 beats. 3 plus 1, first measure, last measure, done. This 8th note is what we would consider to be called a pickup note. So if you're doing like, if you're in a band and you're like, hey, we're gonna be playing some blues, boom, 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 boom. You can have a pickup note go boom, 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 dum, dum, as written as such. 1 E and 1 E and So if I had 1 I'd have boom, boom, boom. If I wanted to stretch it out, we could do this type of notation. 1 E and a 1. 1 E and a 1. 1 E and a 1. So when we're counting these, all the ways that we learn how to count are the ways that we put these rests and these notes in. Up at this top one, 4/4 means there should be 4 beats per this measure, 4 per this measure, 4 per this measure, and 4 per there. Well, let's count them out. We have 1, which is a quarter, 2, 3, and then a rest. Well, the rest represents the 4th beat. Just because we're not playing a note doesn't mean that there is not a beat there. The next one we go to is a half note, which is worth 2 beats. So those 2 beats, we say 1, 2, 3, 4. When I look at this, I see that those notes have the value of 2 beats. Even if my brain doesn't tell me that right away, writing this out in the beginning will help you clap the rhythms. And eventually, once you clock 10, 15, 20 hours doing this, notation will become easier. Again, we have a half note, which is worth 1, 2. Here's our 8th note, but we're not going to write 2 here because 2 is worth that. That's our 3rd beat, and then here's our 4th beat. But it kind of looks weird because we know when we count 8th notes, we say downbeat, upbeat. So 3 and. Oh, well, there we go. And then lastly, we've got 1 beat, 2 beat, and then a rest, still the 3rd beat, and then the 4th beat. So when we count this out, if you want to at home, do it with me. We're going to go 1, 2, ready, go. Quarter, 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 rest. Half, 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 8th note, quarter. Quarter, quarter, rest, quarter. This one will feel a little weird. It feels rushed, but it's not. It just has 2 beats filling the space of 1 quarter, meaning there are still 4 beats per measure, and the 8th note took the place of that 1 quarter note. When we go to this next measure, still in 4/4, I really just mark the first. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is this measure a complete measure? Yes, it is. It has a 1 beat, 2 beat, 3 beat, and 4 beat in 4/4. It just so happens to have the upbeat for the first 2, so we say 1 and 2 and. When we have this, we have our 8th note, which is still right here, beep, boop, beep, but we've added another 8th note, thusly making it a 16th note, 8 times 2. So when we count this, the fluctuation here is 1 E and a. I haven't a clue who came up with the 1 E and a. All I know is when you go to different places in the world, there are different ways to do this. My favorite of which would be Eastern. I think that using the words and the feelings of having a ta, ti, is a much easier way to represent ta, ta. It rolls off the tongue because the T sound, you can actually do a fluttering with the tongue, almost like a roll in Spanish or Portuguese. So one of my favorite things to do is kind of learn this and then learn other ways to do it. If you learn different ways to do the solfege too. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do isn't always called that. In the Eastern era, we'd have ma, sa, pa, ra. So going through different ways to explain to your brain how to do this only solidifies the way that this vocabulary works, the concepts of music. And once you learn the concepts in one language and then another, they amalgamate and you start to understand a little bit more about the traditions and the cultures that are based off of the music that you're reading or watching or sight reading. So, getting back to it. When we count this, we have our 4 and then the E, showing the secondary 8th note. The feeling of this, is this a complete measure? Yeah. We start with a rest here, which is our 1. Here's our 2. We have E and a. E and a. Here's our 3. And then 4, E and a. So this is a complete measure. If you want to clap along with me, here we go. Second line, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 E and a, 4 E and a, rest, 2 E and a, rest, 4 E and a. Interesting? If you're doing this at home, what I behoove you is go slower than what I just did. Tap your foot or your chicken wing and try and get that rhythm called the tempo. 4/4 should be somewhere present. If you're counting it, you're going 1, 2, 3, 4. You could still go 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, where your hands are doing the notation, but your mouth is saying the bass, the root, the tempo of 4/4. You could also switch that, and then you could say 1, 2, or you could clap out quarters, and then I'm clapping too loud. Sorry. And you can do these quarters and say 1 and 2 and 3 E and a 4 E and a 2 E and a 3 4 E and a. You can go through that process of saying those notes out loud. I would suggest not saying the rests. It gets a little convoluted when you're like, rest 2 E and rest 2 E and a rest 3. It's a little too much. So when you see a rest, don't say rest. Just don't say anything. Let that silence or the lack of a tone be the rest. So at this point, we're about 40 minutes into the blah, blah, blah. I hope you're digging on this. This last one might seem a little weird, but what I want you to do is see that this 16th note rest in 4/4, if we were to say 1, 2, 3, 4, this is half of that measure, we would have rest. That feeling of having a quicker note together feels like an 8th note because this 16th note is going directly into this quarter note. Meaning we'd have rest, rest, rest. No, I shouldn't be saying rest. When we start seeing melodies like this written out in form, it makes sight reading that much easier. So what I would suggest to you, and I have no problem suggesting another website. One of the websites that I use that I absolutely adore is called Sight Reading Drums, and they do all sorts of wonderful videos. But the thing that I enjoy the most about the video here that I'm trying to find with technology that I'm horrible with, sorry about the downtime, I will put a link in the description. It is called Sight Read Drums. That is the name. 175,000 people, 538 videos. I utilize these videos with my students. I'll just give you a little, I wonder if I could do this. I don't think this is copyright. The notation that they go through, let's see, sharpen your skills. So here we go. Each video is somewhere between 3 minutes and 5 minutes, and the idea behind this is that when you do something like this for 5 minutes a day, within a month, you will notice complete difference on how things work with your brain and counting out rhythms. You will start seeing that these aren't too terribly hard to put all these structures together and actually start enjoying some of these, what you would consider complex notations. So it goes along with a little blue marker showing you where you are. But everything we talked about right here in this session is exactly what you do. Now this is for drums, so you can see there are trills over notes and accent notes. This is a little bit more in depth. But the notation is still the same. Triple lick. So the idea is you don't have to start off with stuff that has 30-second notes that are tied together with 16th note rests and dotted blah, blah, blah. You can start off just visualizing quarter, quarter, half, quarter, quarter, half, quarter, quarter, half, quarter, quarter, half. Then if you play it the other way, half, quarter, quarter, half, quarter, quarter. Essentially, the same two notes, half notes, quarter notes, played opposite of each other make a rhythm. So if you keep that 4 by stomping or whatever, chicken wing, tick tock, you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, which puts the quarter and then the half, quarter, half, quarter, quarter, half. So the idea is try and manipulate these so you can see the quarter notes before the half notes before the eighth notes after the eighth notes, after the 16ths. And what happens is when you start reading all these like this and writing them out, it becomes easier. And I would behoove anybody that is watching this still to get a book. Doesn't matter what it is, find the book that you use for your instrument that has a little bit of notation and start off slow. If you don't know the song, it's harder, but believe it or not, in nice books that are laid out, the key signature will tell you what the notes sound like, the time signature will tell you how to count those, and then the notation will tell you what the feeling of the rhythm is or the melody over the top of the chords. So when sight reading, music notation, the things, here's our bullet points, the wrap up, if you will. The things that we look for when we're sight reading are the notes in the time signature. Time signatures represent a numerator and a denominator. The numerator represents how many beats are inside the measure, whether they are notes that are essentially lack of tone, rests, or notes that have pitch, like a G. When we have the denominator, we have what note receives the beat. So, note. When we have anything other than 4, we change our notes. There really isn't 8/8, like 8 beats per measure, and the 8th notes get the beat, because math would say, well, what number goes into both of these? If 2 goes into both of these, and you wanted to play a measure that had 1 and 2 and 3 and with 8th notes, or half notes, 1, 2, 1, 2. You could see 2 going into 8, how many times? Well, 4. Hence 4, 4. 2 goes into there. Cool. So we call this cut time and this common time. And then anything other than this just sums down into being either 4, 4 common time, because all of these other measures would fit in there. If we had something like 64, 8. Wow. This is a little hypothetical. How about something a little less hypothetical? 32nd, 16. This is a good one. I've seen these a lot. This is a lot of notes per measure. That means that there are 32 notes per measure, and the 16th note gets the beat. You might think, how is that possible? Well, if you're doing a song like Flight of the Bumblebee or something, and you're having all those notes aren't quarter notes. There's a lot of notes in there. You would have dun, 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 dun if you only use the beginning of those 16th notes, or the 32nd notes, or in this case, 64th notes. So the reason why time signatures are important is because everything can be pretty much subdivided. Time signatures give you the tempo, and then everything from there can be manipulated. We manipulate the tempo in a measure, knowing that when notes in a staff are turned into a measure, that anytime we have stack notes, they're played together. And anytime we have notes that go from left to right, they are played in sequence. Those notes have different durations, and to be able to have those notes, we must have the right notes, or else measures do not make sense. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, we can get rid of notes and then implement other notes that take the place of that beat, but it's just subdivisions of those notes. When we play a tempo, when we put any other rhythm notation which is not on the 1, we are creating something called a rhythm. I can't spell. Rhythms. So time signatures tell us how to sight read our tempos and rhythms. The next thing that we will talk about in a video will be called dynamic markings. You ever get to a song, you're reading in a sight reading thing, you look up at the top and it says with feeling, or moderately, or it has just like an MF, like mezzo forte. We're going to talk about all these little vocabulary words. And Donna, if you're still here with me, yes, we're going to talk about all these different quizzes we've been doing for the last year and a half. I know that you know these, but what I thought about on the ride to work here is that even though the things that are inside my head seem like common sense musically to me, there's a lot of ways to describe it that others that do not know what I'm talking about could benefit from this. So what I was doing this morning while I was driving to work, I was just singing through all of my different scales. I would have something like A, C, E, G, C, and then I realized, I had a wonderful choir teacher which went through the process of telling us how to warm up our voices, how to do sight reading. Now, over the course of 4 years in high school, I elected to do mixed choir, chamber choir, concert choir. My senior year, I taught one of the choir classes. I love music. It's always been a passion of mine. I took 25 years off. Now I'm back doing a little bit more teaching. Teaching myself, I have a teacher. My teacher has a teacher. So the idea about this is daily doing this really helps us. If you haven't watched the other series or the other videos that are about this, we talk about key signatures, the circle of fifths, how to take this key notation and start doing part writing. Figuring out what music analyzation is and how to listen to music that you've listened to your whole life with a brand new set of ears is really what I shoot for with new students. It sometimes seems overwhelming because there is such a lot of info here. However, when we see that there are little mechanisms that we can follow that help us to remember certain rules, the idea is when you follow those rules for so long, you want to creatively break those. That, my friend, is the beauty of music. Once you learn the rules, break them and have fun with it. That makes you an individual artist and shows that you know how to do a little something here and there. Anyway, I really enjoy doing these. If you dig what I do here, please thumbs up, subscribe, put something down below. If there's anybody in the comment section right now that has a question about anything I did, I've got about 5 minutes before my first student. I'm gonna hang out here, and if you have that, put it in the comment section. If not, in about 30 seconds, I'm gonna jump off here. Yeah, musical notation. And honestly, I hope I didn't miss anything. We talked about the dotted notes. We talked about our rest values. We talked about how to read on the staff, what a measure is, what the different time signatures are, how to tell what a rest is, how to categorize these notes together. And we did a little sight reading about how the notes look like on a staff. That's a single staff. I usually write those as very simple as I possibly can, so the notes actually matter.